what else would you like to share with the group today?
Yeah, so I know there's some questions about the shutdown, so I'll just address that. So as I'm sure you're aware, the shutdown started in December, and it's a partial shutdown, so it only impacts specific government entities, so it is not every federal employee, but the major ones that are impacted, Customs and Border Patrol, most of their employees are currently working without pay. Federal Bureau of Prisons employees are working without pay or furloughed. HUD employees, predominantly furloughed, which means anyone who requires engagement with HUD can't get that. A lot of veterans, a lot of elderly, a lot of families with children who rely on HUD resources. So air traffic controllers working without pay, directing airplanes through the skies. So the Airline Pilots Association, for example, has been really adamant about we need to end the shutdown because they're truly concerned about it from a public safety standpoint. TSA, so starting salary for a lot of TSA agents, $17,000 a year, and now they're working without pay. And you want to talk about paycheck to paycheck. If you make $17,000 a year, that's a paycheck to paycheck life, and they have now missed a month's pay, but yet they show up to work because they believe in what they do. It's just heartbreaking. And so the shutdown that started in the 115th, at that time, the Senate voted by voice vote, so recorded unanimous, but it was voice vote, to pass a funding bill that would have funded the government through September for most of the agencies, through February for Homeland Security, allowing what it would have allowed us more time to kind of hash out some of the arguments related to border security and what that means. At the time, then Speaker Paul Ryan refused to take it up for a vote on the House floor. By all accounts, it would have passed. So January 3rd, we were all sworn in, and we took up the same bill that the Senate side had already voted on, that had already passed. We took up the same bill, House version. We voted for it. It passed with Republican support, and then Mitch McConnell on the Senate side refused to take it up. And so the shutdown continued from there. We have since voted a total of 9 times. One of the votes was vacated, so on record 8, but we've technically voted now 9 times to open either all of the shutdown portions of the government or some of the agencies under the premise that, okay, if we're going to continue to fight about Homeland Security, let's at least fund HUD, let's at least fund Department of the Interior, let's at least fund some of these other agencies and departments. And each time it's passed on the House side with Republican support. There's growing Republican support, but on the Senate side, McConnell has refused to bring it to a floor vote. And so there's been a real significant issue there because we keep voting and they're not taking it up, which is the exact opposite of what happened in December. Last week, I did go to the White House as part of a bipartisan group to meet with the president. And that came about. I was invited to Monday night. I got an invitation to go meet with the president, and it turned out that there were other Democrats who were declining for scheduling purposes or whatever reasons their invitations. And so I got looped in with some of them because there was going to be 9 Republicans and potentially just me. And so I had said, listen, I said I would talk to anyone, including the president, on the campaign trail, but can I please go in a bipartisan group? And so there were, I got wind of the fact that there was another group that was going, and so I asked if they wouldn't mind me coming on the Wednesday, I guess, instead. So it got reported that I had turned him down. I hadn't turned him down. I had just asked to come the next day. And so I did go as part of this bipartisan group. I think it was 6 Republicans and 6 Democrats. And we went and had what I felt was a fairly productive meeting. It clearly wasn't that productive because the government still shut down. But there's a lot more contributing factors. It was a very good conversation. I was able to talk directly with the Commissioner of Customs and Border Patrol about some issues related to border funding that they've been requesting, and make clear to the President the impact, the tremendous impact that the shutdown is having on the very function of government and the individuals who serve as public servants. And so I think that was, I'm very happy that I attended that meeting. It was not as popular with some people as it was with others, but I think those are the sorts of things that we need to be doing, because if I have to be willing to sit down and have a conversation and better understand. And frankly, I do better understand the situation. It doesn't make it any easier, but hearing directly from someone's mouth what it is that he's then advocating for with other people, I think it certainly helped my understanding of the situation, or my lack of understanding of the situation, quite frankly, because for me it is just fundamental that we need a government that functions, and I think that everyone in elected office, no matter what branch of government or who elected you or from where, has a vested interest in ensuring that we have a properly functioning government. But I do hope that we reach a point where we can come to the table on this. I think a major goal for many people is that we reopen the government and then have a set period of time in which we commit to coming to some sort of deal on border security. That will be a larger discussion, and I think it should be. And quite frankly, I am very opposed to the notion that we can use federal employees and the very function of government as a negotiating tool. I think that it is offensive to me as a former federal employee, and I think that it's an abdication of kind of Congress's and the White House's responsibility to just have hard conversations about things. I mentioned I've co-sponsored a number of bills. I was an original co-sponsor on a bill that one, gives back pay to federal employees. Now there's talk about how we can help contractors. Another is a bill that would, in the case of a government shutdown, for the remainder of the 116th Congress, withhold payment from members of Congress, which I've personally opted to have my salary withheld. For the remainder of the shutdown. But because of the constitutionally, Congress can't impact its own salary, so this bill that we sponsored would withhold salaries for the remainder of the 116th Congress, and then into future Congresses, if there is a shutdown on both the House and the Senate side, members would lose their pay for any time there is a shutdown, because I fundamentally believe that if you are willing to put the salaries of other people on the table, you should put your own there right along with it. I've also been a long supporter of the No Budget, No Pay Act, which is a bill that gets introduced time and time again. The basic fundamentals are we cannot continue to run our government with these continuing resolutions because nobody wants to have hard conversations about long-term budgeting and planning. And so there's a bill that gets put forth year after year called No Budget, No Pay, which basically says if members of Congress don't do their most fundamental role, which is budgeting, and approving a budget for the government, that they don't get their pay until that budget is in place. And so I don't believe we've introduced one yet in the 116th, but I know that that's coming, and that's something in principle that I firmly support, because again, we need to make sure that people are doing what it is that they were elected to do, and one of those things is ensure the very function of the government and not use these sorts of kind of political games to the detriment of our functioning. I don't have an answer for how quickly it's going to end. I'm horrified that the shutdown continues into this week. This was supposed to be a district week for us to be back in our districts, but I'm actually headed back to Washington right after this. So we'll be voting again. There was one bill that was vacated. If any of you saw, I don't know if you watch C-SPAN in your free time, but we voted to reopen the government, but there was a little bit of a mix-up where it voted with bipartisan, it passed with bipartisan support, but the Republican leadership meant to call for a voice vote. They didn't, and so it got recorded as a unanimous voice vote, which they weren't happy about. So the Democratic leadership agreed to vacate that vote, and so we'll be re-voting on that one. So that'll be our 10th time, 9th bill of record to reopen the government. And I'm hoping that, the president took a step forward this weekend, I think, and had a little bit of a departure from some of the things that he's been saying previously, most notably that a wall to him is not 2,000 miles of a concrete structure. And so where we can talk about fencing and physical barriers and, ideally have law enforcement personnel from Customs and Border Patrol and other, I used to work narco trafficking across the southern border with CIA, so intelligence officers that can tell us kind of what are the current threats and how many hundreds of tunnels have been found along the existing miles of fencing that we have. Those sorts of things I think will be help perhaps move the situation along, but I think it's fundamental that However it is that we commit to it, we need to reopen the government immediately, and then separate from that, I think that the Democratic Party should be willing to commit to a time frame in which we actually come to the table and have the conversations related to border security that many of our Republican colleagues, and in particular the president, want to have. And I think that those conversations are being had in the public sphere, so we do need to make sure that we're making good movement on that. And there was a good bipartisan bill back in 2013 on the Senate side that didn't get a vote on the House side. By all accounts, that would have passed in the Senate, or excuse me, in the House had it come to the floor. There's been a lot of movement on this, but it's never actually kind of moved the full way. So hopefully that's something that we can change, because at this point we have to.
Great. Thank you so very
Thank
much
you.
for being with us